Every single day, millions of people eat only one meal. They call it discipline. They call it optimization. But what is their biology actually experiencing? Because the moment you commit to eating only once per day, 6 hormones in your body begin shifting simultaneously. And the science on what happens next is not simple. Some of those hormonal shifts are genuinely remarkable, protective, health-promoting in ways most people never expected from simply changing when they eat. But 2 of those 6 shifts work against you in ways that are hidden, cumulative, and that most OMAD content deliberately avoids telling you about. Understanding all 6, not just the favorable ones, is what separates people who use OMAD to genuinely improve their health from those who unknowingly damage it. So, let's start from the very first hour, the moment your last meal ends and the 23-hour fasting clock begins. What does your biology do immediately? First, insulin, the hormone that controls where nutrients go after you eat. After your single daily meal, insulin rises sharply, significantly, then it stays elevated for hours. With 3 meals spread across the day, insulin rises and falls 3 times, each at lower peaks. With 1 large meal, it spikes to a much higher single peak. This single large insulin spike is where OMAD's first biological complexity lives. Because while insulin eventually drops, it drops into a valley as deep as the spike was high. Your blood sugar follows insulin in both directions. Very high after your 1 meal, then very low during the 22 hours before the next. This is the hidden stress. Now, here is where it gets genuinely interesting. Because while that glucose roller coaster is happening, several other hormones are responding in ways that are actually beneficial. The second hormone, human growth hormone, during the 23-hour fasting window, HGH rises by approximately 115% above your normal baseline. 115%. That means your growth hormone more than doubles during a typical OMAD fasting window. And its purpose is critically important. HGH during fasting has one primary mission: preserve your muscle tissue while your body burns fat for fuel. It acts as a biological bodyguard for your lean mass. This is one of the primary reasons OMAD does not destroy muscle-to-weight calorie restriction without fasting does. The HGH elevation makes a measurable protective difference. The third hormone, glucagon. As insulin drops during the fast, glucagon rises to maintain blood sugar stability. It signals your liver to release stored glucose and begin fat breakdown. Glucagon is the fat-burning signal. High glucagon means your body is actively mobilizing stored fat for energy. During your 23-hour OMAD fast, it stays elevated most of that time. This is one of OMAD's genuine metabolic advantages. 23 hours of elevated glucagon means 23 hours of sustained fat mobilization. No other eating pattern matches this duration. The fourth hormone, cortisol. And this is where OMAD's first hidden complication arrives. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone, and extended fasting elevates it. Significantly, your body interprets 23 hours without food as a survival stress signal. In response, your adrenal glands release cortisol to mobilize energy and maintain alertness. In short-term acute situations, this cortisol release is manageable and even beneficial. It sharpens focus. It mobilizes fuel. It keeps you functioning effectively during the fast. But when cortisol remains elevated day after day, when OMAD becomes a daily practice, chronic cortisol elevation begins creating problems that accumulate silently over weeks. Chronic cortisol elevation increases visceral fat storage, specifically around your abdominal organs. It raises blood pressure, and it promotes systemic inflammation markers measurably. And here is the cruel irony. Some people do OMAD specifically to reduce belly fat, but if cortisol chronically rises from the extended fast, it works directly against that goal. This is the first hormone working against you. And whether it becomes a problem depends significantly on how you structure your OMAD practice and what you eat during that one meal. The fifth hormone, ghrelin, your primary hunger hormone. And on OMAD, ghrelin does something most people who start this protocol never anticipated and find deeply uncomfortable. Research shows that ghrelin significantly increases on OMAD compared to 3-meal eating patterns. Your body produces more hunger hormone. Not less, more, every single day. This is why studies show a 65% dropout rate for intermittent fasting protocols generally. The hunger doesn't adapt for many people. It intensifies. Biology works against compliance. This is the second hormone working against you, not because OMAD is wrong, but because ghrelin adaptation varies enormously between individuals. For some it fades, for others it amplifies. And when ghrelin is chronically elevated during the day and you finally eat your one meal, the biological drive to overeat is physiologically overwhelming for many people. Overeating at the one meal creates an even larger insulin spike, which creates an even deeper subsequent glucose crash, which intensifies the next day's hunger even further. This is the cycle that destroys OMAD for the majority of people who attempt it, not lack of willpower. Specific hormonal biology that works against the protocol's sustainability. Now, the sixth hormone, insulin-like growth factor 1, IGF-1, this one is more complex. And understanding it is essential for anyone over 35 considering OMAD long-term. During the 23-hour fast, IGF-1 drops. This is associated with reduced cancer cell proliferation, lower inflammation, and enhanced cellular repair signaling. All beneficial. But when IGF-1 chronically stays suppressed, when it drops every single day for months, it can begin reducing the anabolic signals your muscle tissue needs to maintain itself. This is why OMAD done correctly requires strategic protein prioritization at that one meal. Without adequate protein and anabolic signaling, long-term muscle maintenance becomes genuinely challenging. So there are your six hormones: insulin, HGH, glucagon, cortisol, ghrelin, and IGF-1, all six shifting simultaneously every single day on OMAD, all six affecting different biological systems. For shifting in ways that provide genuine, measurable benefits, to shifting in ways that require careful management, or they begin working against everything you're trying to achieve. Now, let's go deeper into what actually happens inside your body, organ by organ, during those 23 hours. Because the hormones are only the beginning of the story. Your liver, during the 23-hour fast, it depletes its glycogen reserves completely, usually within 12 to 16 hours, then shifts fully to producing ketone bodies. Once your liver begins producing ketones consistently, your brain receives a measurably different and more stable fuel source than glucose alone provides. This is why many OMAD practitioners report unusual mental clarity and focus during their fasting hours, not as a placebo, as a genuine consequence of ketone fueling of neurons. Your pancreas, during the fast, insulin production drops dramatically as blood glucose falls. The pancreatic beta cells responsible for insulin production essentially rest for 23 hours. This extended pancreatic rest is one of the most clinically significant benefits of OMAD for people with insulin resistance or prediabetes. Less demand means gradual recovery of sensitivity. Research confirms that OMAD and time-restricted eating can improve insulin sensitivity markers significantly, reducing fasting glucose, HbA1c, and inflammatory markers associated with metabolic disease. Your gut. This is where OMAD's effects become particularly fascinating, and where the science is rapidly evolving in ways most health content hasn't yet caught up to. Your gut microbiome, the trillion-plus bacteria living in your intestines, follows a circadian rhythm. It has its own internal biological clock that regulates when it performs which functions. When you eat at consistent times, your microbiome synchronizes to that schedule. Certain beneficial bacterial strains proliferate during fasting hours, others during feeding windows. OMAD, when practiced at consistent daily timing, can create a remarkably stable and predictable microbiome rhythm, one that may significantly improve gut barrier function and reduce systemic inflammation. But OMAD practiced at inconsistent times, eating at different hours each day, disrupts the circadian microbiome rhythm and can produce the opposite effect on gut health. Timing consistency is not optional in OMAD. Your microbiome needs to know when to expect food. Without that predictability, the gut health benefits do not materialize reliably. Now your brain. Because what OMAD does to neurological function across 23 hours is one of the most consistently reported and scientifically interesting aspects of this protocol. During the fasting window, BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, rises. This is the protein that promotes neuron growth, repair, and the formation of new neural connections. Higher BDNF is directly associated with better memory consolidation, improved learning speed, greater emotional resilience, and reduced risk of neurodegenerative conditions over time. Combined with ketone fueling of neurons, the brain during OMAD fasting hours can operate in a state that many researchers describe as neurologically optimal for focused cognitive work. This is why many OMAD practitioners schedule their most demanding cognitive work during their fasting hours, and why many report that eating actually reduces their mental sharpness temporarily. Now, let's talk about what OMAD actually does to your body composition over time, because the first week of OMAD will deceive you completely if you don't understand the science. Week 1 of OMAD, the scale will likely drop 2 to 4 pounds. You will feel lighter. Your clothes may feel slightly looser. You will feel like it's working magnificently. Almost none of that is fat. Research shows that week 1 OMAD weight loss is predominantly water weight and glycogen, the body depleting its stored carbohydrate reserves and releasing the water bound to them. For every gram of glycogen your muscles release, 3 to 4 grams of water leave with it. That 2 to 4 pound drop, mostly water that will return when you resume normal eating. Week 2, the dramatic scale drop slows. Many people panic here. They think OMAD has stopped working. They think their metabolism has slowed. Neither is true. What actually begins in week 2 is real fat loss. Research shows real fat mobilization on OMAD starts around week 2, approximately 0.5 to 1 pound of actual fat per week. 0.5 to 1 pound per week sounds unimpressive, but it represents actual adipose tissue reduction, not glycogen depletion, not water loss. Actual stored fat being burned consistently. By weeks 4 to 6, visible body composition changes begin becoming apparent. The fat that has been quietly mobilizing is now noticeable in how your body looks and feels. And something important is happening internally that the scale will never show you. Autophagy is running at levels that typical intermittent fasting protocols simply do not reach. Research shows that autophagy genes activate between 1.4 and 4.2 times their baseline activity during OMAD's extended fasting window. That is a genuine and significant increase. 23 hours of fasting consistently reaches the autophagy activation levels that most 16-hour intermittent fasters approach, but rarely sustain long enough to fully realize. This means cellular debris that typical fasting never fully clears. Damaged proteins, worn mitochondria, misfolded cellular components, gets properly addressed during OMAD's extended window. Now let's talk about the most controversial finding in OMAD research, the one that the fitness community largely ignores, and the one that anyone practicing daily OMAD should know. In 2024, a study published in the Journal of the American Heart Association found that eating only one meal per day was associated with significantly elevated cardiovascular mortality risk. The association was significant, and it's the kind of finding that requires serious consideration, not dismissal, from anyone thinking about adopting OMAD as a permanent daily practice. Now, observational study limitations matter here. People eating only one meal a day in the general population may be doing so due to poverty, stress, or existing illness, not intentional optimization. Intentional, planned, well-executed OMAD, where nutrient adequacy is maintained, is biologically different from involuntary food restriction from socioeconomic or illness causes. But the cardiovascular finding still warrants attention, specifically regarding two things: blood pressure effects from chronic cortisol elevation and the large daily insulin spike from one concentrated meal. The daily large insulin spike from one concentrated meal creates vascular stress that 3 smaller meals distributing the same insulin over time simply do not produce at the same intensity. Repeated daily vascular stress from large insulin spikes over months and years is a legitimate biological concern that the research community is now taking increasingly seriously. This doesn't mean OMAD is dangerous for everyone. It means the cardiovascular variable is real and requires mitigation, specifically through what you eat during that single meal and when. Now let's talk about the single most important variable in OMAD that determines whether it works for you or works against you. The timing of that one meal, your body's insulin sensitivity, how efficiently your cells respond to insulin, follows a strict circadian rhythm. It peaks in the morning and declines significantly toward evening. This means if you eat your one daily meal in the morning or early afternoon, insulin handles the glucose from that meal efficiently. Glucose is cleared rapidly. Vascular stress is minimized. But if you eat your one daily meal in the evening, which most OMAD practitioners do, insulin sensitivity is at its lowest. The same food produces a much larger and longer glucose spike. A study published in Nature Medicine confirmed that early time-restricted eating, finishing meals before 5 p.m., produced significantly better metabolic outcomes than late eating at the same calorie level. The same meal, the same calories, eaten at different times, producing measurably different hormonal responses, different glucose handling, and different long-term metabolic outcomes. Timing is biology. This single finding changes the practical recommendation for OMAD entirely. If you're eating your one meal at dinner, which most people do, you may begin the worst possible metabolic timing. But shifting your OMAD meal to earlier in the day, even to midday, significantly improves insulin efficiency, reduces cardiovascular stress, and aligns with your body's natural metabolic peak. Now, let's address the question most people have already asked themselves while watching this. What about muscle? Will eating only once a day cause muscle loss over time? The honest science. It depends almost entirely on two factors: how much protein you consume in that single meal, and whether you're providing a muscle-building stimulus through resistance training. Research on muscle protein synthesis shows that you can consume protein once daily and still build or maintain muscle, if that single dose is adequate and resistance training stimulus is present. The key word is adequate. For most adults, muscle protein synthesis requires at minimum 30 to 40 grams of high-quality protein in a single dose to trigger a full anabolic response. OMAD forces you to consume your entire day's protein requirement in one sitting. That's a minimum of 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, all at once. For a 75-kilogram person, that's 120 to 165 grams of protein in one meal. That is a large quantity to consume comfortably in one sitting. Not impossible, but it requires intentional, strategic meal planning. OMAD without protein planning is one of the most reliable ways to slowly lose muscle mass without realizing it. Now, let's talk about the practical realities of OMAD, not the idealized version presented in optimization content, the actual biological experience most people go through. The first 2 weeks are genuinely difficult for most people. Ghrelin is elevated. Cortisol is adjusting. The body is recalibrating to a completely new eating pattern it has never experienced before. Sleep may be disrupted. Hunger can feel overwhelming in the late morning and afternoon. Social eating becomes complicated. These are not signs of failure. They are signs of biological adaptation. For most people who successfully adapt, which takes 3 to 4 weeks, something then shifts. Ghrelin stabilizes. Cortisol recalibrates. And the hunger waves become more manageable. But for a significant percentage of people, particularly those with a history of anxiety, high chronic stress, or hormonal imbalances, ghrelin and cortisol never fully adapt to daily OMAD. For those individuals, the 65% dropout rate isn't a personal failing. It's biology telling them that this specific protocol is not compatible with their specific physiology. This is why OMAD is not a universal protocol. It is a powerful tool that works extraordinarily well for the right biological profile and remarkably poorly for others. So what does the ideal OMAD profile look like? What biological characteristics make someone more likely to thrive on one meal a day versus struggle with it chronically? Thriving profiles: people with naturally low baseline cortisol, those with good existing insulin sensitivity, people without significant blood sugar dysregulation history, those with low baseline anxiety. Struggling profiles: people with high chronic stress, those with insulin resistance or diabetes, anyone with a history of eating disorders, those with hypothyroidism or adrenal dysregulation. This is not about whether OMAD is good or bad. It is about whether OMAD is right for you specifically. And that determination requires honest self-assessment and ideally clinical guidance. Now let's look at the specific science of what OMAD actually achieves for people who do it correctly, consistently, and with a biological profile that allows them to thrive. Metabolic flexibility. OMAD practitioners who adapt successfully develop extraordinary metabolic flexibility, the ability to seamlessly switch between glucose and fat as fuel sources. This metabolic flexibility becomes a permanent biological adaptation. Even outside of fasting, adapted OMAD practitioners burn fat more efficiently than non-fasting counterparts. Inflammation reduction. Studies show that sustained OMAD practice significantly reduces circulating inflammatory markers, including C-reactive protein, IL-6, and TNF-alpha, across multiple studies. Lower systemic inflammation is directly linked to reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, neurodegenerative conditions, and several cancers. This is not a trivial benefit. Adiponectin increases. This beneficial hormone, produced by fat tissue, rises on OMAD and acts as a powerful anti-inflammatory and insulin-sensitizing signal throughout your body. Higher adiponectin is associated with better insulin sensitivity, lower cardiovascular risk, reduced inflammatory markers, and improved body composition outcomes, all from one adaptive hormonal change. Mitochondrial efficiency. The consistent metabolic stress of daily OMAD fasting stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis, the creation of new, more efficient energy-producing structures inside cells. More mitochondria and more efficient mitochondria mean better cellular energy production, which translates to more stable energy, fast recovery, and improved physical performance over time. Now, let's bring everything together with the practical question. If someone wants to try OMAD correctly, in a way that maximizes benefits and minimizes risks, what does that actually look like? First, timing. Eat your one meal between noon and 3 p.m. whenever possible. This aligns your eating with your body's natural insulin sensitivity peak and your microbiome circadian rhythm. Second, protein priority. Ensure your single meal contains at minimum 100 to 150 grams of high-quality protein. This is non-negotiable for muscle maintenance on OMAD. Third, food quality over food quantity. Your single meal must deliver a complete micronutrient profile, vitamins, minerals, fiber, and essential fatty acids that 3 smaller meals would have provided. Nutrient-dense whole foods, not processed calorie-dense foods that fill your energy needs without meeting your micronutrient requirements. OMAD magnifies the consequences of poor food choices enormously. Fourth, resistance training. To prevent the muscle loss risk that OMAD creates through chronic IGF-1 suppression, consistent resistance training provides the essential anabolic stimulus your muscles need. Fifth, stress management. Because cortisol is already elevated from the daily 23-hour fast, adding additional chronic stress exponentially compounds the negative effects of that cortisol elevation. Breathing practices, adequate sleep, outdoor time, social connection. These are not lifestyle extras on OMAD. They are cortisol management strategies that protect the protocol's effectiveness. 6. Monitoring. Anyone practicing daily OMAD long-term should track blood pressure, fasting glucose, and inflammatory markers periodically. The cardiovascular finding makes this genuine medical prudence. Now the honest question, given everything, the benefits, the risks, the requirements, the individual variation, is OMAD worth it? The science's answer is, it depends entirely on who you are. For someone with the right biological profile, good metabolic health, low chronic stress, no hormonal dysfunction, OMAD done correctly can produce extraordinary and lasting metabolic improvements. The metabolic flexibility, the autophagy depth, the inflammation reduction, the insulin sensitivity improvement. For the right person, these benefits compound over months into a fundamentally different biology. For someone with the wrong profile, high chronic stress, insulin resistance, hormonal issues, OMAD can accelerate the very problems they're trying to solve, inadvertently and invisibly. The difference between these two outcomes is not discipline. It is biological compatibility. And understanding that distinction is perhaps the most important thing this video can give you. Now, let's address something specifically for people who want the benefits of OMAD's extended fasting, but are concerned about the cardiovascular risk or the ghrelin and cortisol complications. The 18 to 6 window. 18 hours of fasting, 6 hours of eating, capturing most of OMAD's autophagy and metabolic benefits while dramatically reducing the ghrelin and cortisol stress. Research shows the autophagy activation difference between 23-hour OMAD and 18-hour fasting is meaningful but not enormous. The risk difference, however, is significantly larger. For most people without a specific reason to need 23 hours of daily fasting, an 18-hour window achieves most of OMAD science-backed benefits with considerably less biological stress. And if your goal is specifically the deepest autophagy and metabolic reset that extended fasting provides, occasional 23-hour fasts, once or twice weekly, may deliver that without the daily chronic stress. The science is clear. It is not the duration of a single fast that produces the greatest long-term benefit. It is the consistency of fasting practice over months and years. A sustainable 18-hour fast practice daily for years produces better long-term outcomes than a daily 23-hour fast that causes chronic cortisol elevation and is eventually abandoned. Now, let's zoom out to the bigger picture that OMAD science reveals. Not about one meal per day specifically, about how meal timing and frequency shape your biology over a lifetime. The modern eating pattern, 3 meals plus multiple snacks across 16 or more waking hours, keeps insulin perpetually elevated, mTOR perpetually active, autophagy perpetually suppressed. This state, perpetual fed state across most of your waking hours, is an evolutionary novelty. Your biology was not designed to handle constant nutrient availability without fasting periods. Every hour you spend in a fasted state, whether through OMAD or any structured fasting, is an hour your body spends in repair and maintenance mode instead of perpetual building mode. OMAD is simply the most extreme version of intentionally creating that fasting repair window. Whether it is the right version for you is a question only your biology can answer, but understanding what OMAD does to 6 hormones, to your liver, your pancreas, your gut, your brain, your cellular biology, gives you something more valuable than a protocol. It gives you the ability to make truly informed decisions about your own biology, based on science, based on your specific profile, not based on what works for someone else on social media. Because the reason OMAD works magnificently for some people and fails spectacularly for others has nothing to do with discipline, motivation, or effort. It has everything to do with biology. And biology, when you understand it, stops being a mystery that happens to you. It becomes a system you can read, interpret, and work with instead of blindly against. The 6 hormones that shift when you eat once a day are not random. They are your body communicating, adapting, and, if you listen carefully, telling you whether the protocol fits. When HGH rises and glucagon stays elevated and your energy is stable, your biology is saying the protocol fits. When cortisol is chronically elevated and ghrelin amplifies daily, it's saying it doesn't. Learning to read those signals, to distinguish adaptation discomfort from biological incompatibility, is one of the most valuable biological literacy skills you can develop. OMAD at its best is not a diet. It is a biological experiment, conducted on yourself, with your own body as a laboratory and your hormones as the data readout. And the results of that experiment, run carefully, monitored honestly, and interpreted through the lens of real science, tell you something no generic advice ever can. What works for you. Most people who try OMAD never understand why it worked for them or why it didn't. They attribute it to willpower, to the wrong foods, to the wrong schedule. You now understand the actual answer. 6 hormones, their individual shifts, their interactions, their biological logic, and how to read what they're telling you about your own compatibility. If this changed how you think about eating, subscribe. Because when you understand the biology behind your food choices, every meal becomes a decision you're actually in control of.